name is Marcin Acuna. I'm the president and the captain of the Light Company of the 8th Regiment of Foot. That's the King's Regiment and the Civilians of Canada. Today we are here to discuss a matter that's often ignored in the context of the 18th century military, and that's vice. The first one that we're going to discuss is probably the most common one still present today, and that is beer. Beer was an essential drink for all soldiers. It was provided in great quantities. Thankfully, for the 8th Regiment, we could see that they had substantial amounts on Carleton Island. What I have here is an example of a regular pewter mug, not necessarily something every soldier would have access to, but they were present at Fort Haldeman. Beer was obviously a staple of a soldier's life, that we provided a good sum of it on a regular basis, but that's not all. One drink that soldiers would often make use of and was quite plentiful in the outposts, specifically within the context of Carleton Island for the Light Company, is that of rum. Rum was produced in the Caribbean using Caribbean sugar and spices and brought up to the northern outposts. We find great records of this across the outposts of the King's Regiment, and as noted specifically within the context of Carleton Island, Fort Haldeman. Rum is something that has caused some issues for the regiment, though. What we see is that in times of great scarcity, of the soldiers not being paid on time, it also results in several mutinies. We can see a few cases of this, such as in Fort Michilimackinac in modern-day Michigan. Rum is not always necessarily drank as it is provided. Often you can create what we know of as grog or rum punch. You produce this by mixing sugar, water, lemon juice, sometimes spices, and rum. You can do this with a punch bowl, such as we have here. You can find quite good ones online, originals. If you are lucky, you can also find a few reproductions that will suit your needs. For our purposes, we use this one over here. What you will do is you will put 1 part rum, in our case, to 3 parts water. You will use about a cup of sugar. The sugar doesn't really necessarily matter. You can use demerara sugar, you can use white sugar as it was available in the form of cones. You then will add about a cup of lemon juice, as well as spices as you desire. Mix this all together and it makes quite an interesting drink. We do caution though, the more rum you put, the stronger it is, so add a little bit of water, and as the night goes by, just keep on adding a little bit of water. Your guests won't know. They'll think they've had plenty of rum. Another drink that we had quite a bit of that we can find but I don't have available today is arak. Often this is only produced and made use of for the officers coming from the Philippines. Arak is more of an exotic form of rum. One other drink that is quite popular is wine. We have a great deal of wine available in our records, often taking the form of port wine. We have numerous barrels, again at Carleton Island, Fort Haldeman, for the use of the regiment. We're not quite sure if this was particularly for the use of officers or given to the men as well. We do have rather large amounts of this available. Surprisingly, the amounts are quite astonishing. And again, this doesn't mean that this was always available. There was great times of scarcity for the regiment and its men. This resulted in mutinies, and this did create a great deal of trouble for them. Trouble is what we are here to talk about today, but there were a few things that were less troublesome, not necessarily a vice, but one that was provided to most soldiers, and that is chocolate. What I have here is cacao beans. These are actual beans taken out of a cocoa pod. What happens is these are broken down and processed to produce chocolate, not necessarily as we know it today, though there were some sweet forms of chocolate available. Soldiers would quite regularly, especially in the case of the King's Regiment, provided with chocolate. They can use this for producing a drink, such as hot chocolate today, with spices, water, sugar to sweeten it. This could actually be used as your food. They were quite aware of the fact that it had caffeine. They did not necessarily know how it worked. They knew that it was a stimulant, and that chocolate was something that soldiers found rather pleasant. And they needed this. Conditions on the outposts were not favorable. They were rather difficult for all of these men. this resulted in our next vice, one that we often find across North America in the context of British soldiers, and one that was actually not illegal at this point in time, and that is gambling. For here I have a traveling box that I use for civilian events when I run special occasions. We have a special object to discuss later on. And this includes some of the things that we will see. One game that we have that is quite popular among soldiers is dice, one of their most favorite vices. Dice are quite commonly produced out of bone, though we also have examples of ivory for upper class individuals, not necessarily in the context of soldiers. Dice are also produced out of musket balls. Our friend Karen Bloom was kind enough to provide us examples of this from one of her sites in the southern US in the past. It's quite surprising to see what they were able to make use of, if required, to entertain themselves. Dice, there are many different games that you can play with these. If you look at our friend's page, the sign of the blue rake, he often has quite a few examples of period games that you can entertain yourself with that soldiers would have also enjoyed. Soldiers would have used quite a few different things as gaming pieces for various games that they had. Sometimes they would make them up themselves in terms of the game. As we noted, we have quite a few pieces of bone that can be produced on site if you have excess bone. It's not something that's that difficult to work with. If you're an upper class individual, we also have such things as mother of pearl, though of course a soldier would not necessarily have access to something like this. Even simple wooden pieces are often made use of and found. But if you have a little bit of money, again, not necessarily in the case of a soldier, you would have something such as gaming pieces, such as these of fish. Again, for your average soldier, you're going to make use of what you can find: a musket ball, a stone, a piece of bone that you might make use of into creating something. The most common games, though, were those of card games. Thankfully, we have quite a few period card games that we can make use of. For our entertainment, our friend Trisha Acuna from Timbrel Coburn Cunha produces one of the only period authentic sets of cards on linen cardstock, which is what we have here. Card games often consisted of ones such as whist, which was quite popular. Some individuals would also play Pharaoh, but that's more of a game that you find in a civilian context. Whist being one of the popular soldiers' games. Again, we have various resources that we can make available to teach you how to play this, but we're not going to get into that today. But let it be known, dice and cards are two of the most common and popular ways of entertaining yourself. Obviously, there's a few others. Some of the forms of entertainment are a little difficult to discuss, and we're going to do that as politely and carefully as we can. The King's Regiment, as with every regiment, had standards that it had to adhere to. Sadly, the King's Regiment, as time went on, as they were in North America for 19 years, faced a great number of difficulties. One of these were issues with alcohol, but the other was prostitution. And yes, there was prostitution in the British Army. It was not accepted. The vast majority of individuals in the Army did not participate in this in terms of those that are following the Army. In fact, it's a bit of a myth. Most individuals, most of the women that follow the Army did not participate in this, but it did take place. We have records of this taking place in Carlton Island, Fort Haldimand, once again, in the context of the 84th Regiment of Foot, the Royal Emigre. We have cases of men being disciplined for engaging in prostitution to the point that it started reducing their numbers as men became ill with syphilis. And again, I need to stress that this is not something that was engaged in by all the women of the military. Quite the opposite, actually. They had very high standards. These are individuals that carried themselves quite well, but there were individuals in the outskirts that did participate in this, and it created problems. We have one story out in Detroit where a member of the King's Regiment, a sergeant, and his wife were engaging in the provision of this service to an officer. The officer apparently was having an affair with the wife unknown to the sergeant, and as a result of this affair, this engaging in prostitution without always being paid for, the sergeant stabbed the officer. All three of them, instead of being punished in terms of a criminal context, were sent to the Caribbean, where they were, well, we lost track of them at that point. We have records available that we can share. with you in terms of this, please feel free to reach out to us and provide that. But how would a soldier protect himself? Well, sometimes they didn't from disease, and that's something a little disturbing. But in certain cases, they had condoms. Yes, they had them as well. They were not effective by modern standards, but they were reusable, made out of linen, or in certain cases, sheep intestine. You would wash them out after you've done your business. So we do not encourage that you do this, but this is an example of a period condom. If you'd like to find out how to use one of these, we're not going to help you. Have a good day when it comes to that. None of our business. But we do not recommend that you do this. Again, in the case of Carlton Island, it doesn't appear that if they were using this, it was very effective. Quite a few men were disciplined by the officers for becoming rather sick. Measures had to be put into place to prevent them from engaging in further activities, and they didn't work. This continues for a period of several months, at which point we run out of records, but we can only imagine that some action was taken. As you can see, the life of the soldier was one that was often rather filled with work, but there was a lot of downtime, and as a result, they engaged in the use of many of these vices. One of the most common ones is snuff. If you were an officer, that's one that we find quite often, but for a regular soldier, we also have tobacco that were provided or purchased as well. Pipes are rather common. If you broke a pipe, it was not of much concern, so we see a great number of broken pipes along original locations that they occupied. Pipes are something that are really disposable. If you had to clean out a pipe, you could put it in the fire, burn off the residue, take it out, and it's reusable, but if it breaks, it breaks. You can get another one quite easily. Actually, we have quite expensive pipes by modern standards, and one of them broke in the mail. Sadly, this was quite a nice pipe. The funny thing is, if you're a child, and there were children in camp, you could take the stem of a pipe and blow bubbles with it. Yes, there were lots of children, they had to entertain themselves, and blowing bubbles with a pipe is a period correct thing. There are many illustrations of children doing this, and again, you can do that with a broken pipe. One thing that we do not encourage is obviously smoking, but it does take place. It's something that our members do, and sadly, children also engaged in this at a certain age. When it came to the civilian population of the province of Quebec, it was recorded that almost every single man and woman over a certain age were engaging in the use of tobacco. This included children, so it was quite prevalent. As we've shown you today, the vices were extensive. They were used to entertain themselves. Just as then, every person has something that they like to indulge in that perhaps they shouldn't. But it's the reality of the 18th century. These are the lives that these soldiers had to live, and the women that followed with them as women as well, and the children, and the men who provided logistical supports for the military as well, engaged in all of these. Consumption of rum, wine, of beer as well, playing dice, playing cards, and yes, even prostitution, which again, we have to stress, is not something that was engaged in by the vast majority of these individuals, but it did take place, and it's something that we need to be very careful about discussing, but needs to be acknowledged at the same time. So I would like to thank you for joining me today to participate in this video. We will have many more for you, and you will be able to find them on this channel. You'll be also able to find more information about us and our organization by finding us on Facebook as the 8th, the King's Regiment Light Company, and the Civilians of Canada, as well as on our website at k8lights.com. That's K, the number 8, lights.com. Hope you enjoyed this video, and please feel free to provide us with your feedback. If you have any ideas, any suggestions, feel free to reach out to us, and have a great day. God save the King.